Palestine will be free. Palestine will be free. From the evil to the hate, to the lies they create. Palestine will be free. Palestine will be free.
Good evening. Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to a special edition of this programming here on Hilaal TV called The Price for Freedom. Of course, throughout the day, being it October the 7th, we have seen various content being played out here on Hilaal TV with the various interviews being done by my colleagues. You've seen documentaries being played across the day to mark 1 year since the start of one of the most brutal genocides of the 21st century. It's a genocide that has not just started in 2023. It started even before 1948, when the Nakba began, when millions and millions of Palestinians were displaced from their homes due to a settler colonialism state, which is now, of course, known as Israel. The genocide in Gaza has claimed close to 42,000 lives. The deaths, you see it on TV. You see the displacement of millions of people. The injuries reaching close to 100,000. The missing over 10,000. The deaths of journalists are reaching skyrocketing levels never seen before in any conflict of the 21st century. And all this while we ask ourselves, where is the international law? Where is the global condemnation? Not just the condemnation of the global south, but the global condemnation of these crimes that are happening in Gaza. And Gaza is not the only one that is being spared by this brutality. We see it happening in the occupied West Bank, where settlers have continued to go into these parts of Palestine, take homes, and commit violence. It continues right up until today, and there's no sign of a ceasefire and no sign of any normality being brought to that part of the world. Now, we have gotten a list of panelists, and I'd like to think of them as being a world-class panelist to discuss 1 year on since the start of that genocide. We were supposed to have Ahmed Ghunaim, who of course lives here in South Africa. He is a survivor of the current genocide and he's a journalist. Unfortunately, he could not join us, and we wish he was here because he would have really offered so much to this discussion. But definitely online, who we have Professor Salim Vally, who is a BDS member of South Africa, Wesam Ahmad, who joins us from Ramallah in the occupied West Bank, who is the Al-Haq Head of the Center for Applied International Law. I also have Shuruq Asad, who is a member of the General Secretariat of the Palestinian Journalist Syndicate, who is also joining us from Ramallah. And joining us from Detroit, Michigan, I'd like to welcome Tareh, who is a Middle Eastern political analyst and a Palestinian American. I'd like to thank all of you for joining us here for this 1 hour special. I want to start off with you, Wesam, on this question. 1 year on, this has truly been a test of so many aspects, hasn't it, of the world, of what we are viewing right now with regards to this genocide in Gaza. How has Ramallah, and this question is going to be asked also to Shuruq, seen the devastation that is currently happening in Gaza?
Thank you very much for having me. Yes, I think I mean, the situation that the Palestinians have been facing goes back even before the Nakba, and I think it's important to contextualize to understand the current situation beyond the last year, and the interest of Western powers in the region. And the establishment of Israel as a settler colonial state is very much connected to these broader imperial ambitions. And the Palestinian people have been victims of these broader Western imperial ambitions for over a century. the manifestation of Israel as a settler colonial state and the Nakba that resulted are all consequences of these settler colonial endeavors. And the colonization of Palestine has continued, and we see it continuing today in manifesting in these different forms through the practices of apartheid and the commission of genocide and the continued expansion of settlements. But this is all, the characteristics of settler colonialism. And it isn't unique to Palestine in a broader historical sense. But what is unique is that we are seeing this firsthand, a genocide being live streamed, and attest to the development, the so-called progressive development of international law and humanity to allow this kind of practice to continue in the 21st century. We are seeing a test to this so-called development. Have we really progressed? Has international law developed? Has humanity developed? Or are we seeing the masks coming off and bearing the inherent racist, supremacist ideology that is the driving force behind these imperial ambitions, simply manifested in a new way today that the Palestinian people are facing?
Shuruq, same question to you, because of course you live in the occupied West Bank, and it's a very same place within Palestine that has also been not left alone by the Israeli occupation forces.
Yes, let me first tell you that I'm the fourth generation of Al-Nakba. I know this occupation started way before Al-Nakba, but I am this fourth generation that lived, inherited the loss of the land, inherited the occupation, inherited all this system that continued in different forms, actually. And this was the deadliest year for us. It has always been hard to live under occupation, but I think not me, not any Palestinian, maybe not anybody in the world who is really human being and has his humanity still alive, is the same person after this genocide that happened in front of everybody for our families. And I lost 80 of my husband's family in Gaza in this war. Most of them are still there. He lost cousins that he did not even meet since a while. We have emergency in our home every day. Where they shelled? Will they be alive tomorrow? Where are they? Did they survive? Is there connectivity? Is there water? Is there medication? It's been a very, very, very deadly year. And we'll talk about our journalist colleagues maybe later. But also I have to tell you that we have to look at it as it's a war. It's a genocide, Palestinian genocide. I don't like usually to use the term of Israel, Gaza, or genocide. It is in Gaza. Gaza paid a very hard price, but it is on Palestinians. And West Bank has been really hard because there has always been checkpoints, but after last October, Israel really, because Israel did the wall in 2002 and made the apartheid real on ground, and now it's what they want to do is really to take more the land and put us all in cantons, and that's why they started dividing the West Bank. And now I cannot move. There's 550 military checkpoints. There's more than 120 gates between villages, and there's the cement wall, and there's the settlements. This whole system, we've been talking about this before we're on air, but it's really hard to explain it to people. What does it mean to live under daily occupation when you're not safe, when any single thing in your life is really attached to a soldier who can give you the right to eat or drink or even have light in your home, or now they're threatening to cut the gas even in Ramallah Petrol. It's very hard, and even the invasions were very brutal, using the drones. So we are living really in the worst يعني human rights. And humanity is in its worst picture, in my opinion.
Prof. Vally, of course, us here in Johannesburg, South Africa has stood firm with the people of Palestine. It's a historical relationship that has happened. And Prof, you would know well because you were there in the dark days of apartheid, knowing and seeing what had happened with the National Party. South Africa's relationship with Palestine is a special one, isn't it? Because the historical context of it speaks volumes.
Yes, absolutely, Fahraaz, and thank you, and greetings to my fellow panelists and the viewers. The court case didn't come out of the blue. There's context to it as well, and it's been a long history of solidarity with the Palestinian struggle. We have to remember that apartheid Israel, at a time when relations with most countries around the world dissolved, Israel continued supporting apartheid apartheid South Africa through armaments and various other ways. I mean, they were responsible with France for the building of 6 nuclear bombs. They trained our police. They, at a time when young people, primarily school students in 1976, had an uprising against apartheid, John Foster, the apartheid prime minister, was feted in Israel, and he signed many deals. And also they supported the Bantustan. So, South Africans also recognized this repression, this oppression. Many of the laws, there are about 65
we seem to have lost
odd laws that are akin to what they are. Can you hear me?
Professor Vally, I think we're just going to have to ask you to maybe just sort your network out. We seem to be losing you there, but while you try and sort that out, let me bring in Muna into the conversation. Muna, where South Africa had managed its relationship with Palestine, especially, post October the 7th, when we're going to talk about the ICJ case in a bit, the United States under President Joe Biden have just mismanaged it badly, haven't they? In terms of really not condemning anything that Israel is doing right now, rather a bit more support for its ally in the Middle East. Sorry, Muna, I'm going to have to ask you to unmute, please.
My apologies.
Okay, no problem. Please do go ahead.
Absolutely, but the real question is this really outside of the discourse of American policy? If we actually look at the U.S. policy, the U.S. foreign policy, considering the question of Palestine and the settler colonial state, we will find out that this, the current administration and its current unwavering support to the Israeli settler colonial regime, even amidst a live broadcasted genocide, which has been the most devastating in the 21st century, still maintains its unwavering support for Israel. So in that sense, it becomes very important that we actually unfold the historical relationship that explains this unwavering support. The Biden administration and whatever administration will come in the future, I believe. So, I would like to begin in 1917 at the onset of the Balfour Declaration. Most people think that, it's a common knowledge that the Balfour Declaration was actually issued by Britain, and it promised the land of Palestine to the Zionist movement. What most people don't know, however, is that within few months, right before the few months prior to issuing the declaration, there were four drafts actually. There were four drafts were actually drafted, and they were actually sent to the United States to see whether they would actually endorse this declaration. Initially, Wilson actually told Britain that no, this is not the right time. Don't. Let's not declare, or let's not release this declaration. A few months later, he actually, Britain goes back to consult with the U.S. again, and the U.S. says yes. What does this say? This says that although the Balfour Declaration was issued by Britain on a stamped by Britain, but it's actually the U.S. that played the essential role behind that. Meaning, if the U.S. did not want that declaration to see light, then that declaration would not have seen the light. So why? Then the question becomes why. Why is it that since 1917, the U.S. saw that it was fit to start aligning itself behind the Zionist movement. Of course, without having to go through a lot of the history and the background, because there's much to be said about that. But we can go back to, for example, Sykes-Picot and dividing the Arab world between the superpowers, the Second World War, when basically after the Second World War, the United States became a hegemonic power, emerged as a hegemonic power at the expense, of course, of the Soviet, the Soviet Union, which basically had endured the bulk of the burden of defeating the Nazis. So having only getting itself involved in the later part of the World War II, basically the U.S. Emerged as a hegemony because it maintained its economic structure. Its GDP was high. It didn't suffer the same casualties and catastrophes that other nations who fought the war actually did. So, but in order for you actually to maintain your hegemony, and you need vital resources, and you have to secure those vital resources for you to actually. They become almost like an existential, an existential need for the U.S. to secure some of these resources. And of course, they turn to the Middle East to find these resources, oil and gas mainly, because at that time, this is the only way that they can actually expand and build on their economic improvements. So in that sense, for the United States to maintain its hegemony, it needed to control the Middle East. And what is the best way to control the Middle East than having an arm of the U.S. planted inside the Middle East? And this, of course, explains why the Israel, since establishment, it's been supported by the United States, especially, for example, in the 73 war, where actually Egypt and Syria, launched an attack on Israel to liberate the Golan Heights and Sinai, and the United States sent direct military aid in the battlefield to the Israeli forces, because they saw that the Egyptian and Syrian armies were actually winning the battle. They knew that they could not afford an Israeli loss. They delivered these military equipments to the battlefield. This is unprecedented in the history. That's how much the United States actually needs Israel. As a matter of fact, at the Reagan administration, I can't remember the name, I think Haig or something like that. I think he was I can't remember even his title, but he actually said that if Israel did not exist, the US would necessarily have created Israel because it needed Israel.
I have to stop you there, unfortunately, because we've got so much to talk about. I want to come back to Professor Vally. Prof, 1980s, it's a key moment in the boycott against the apartheid regime of South Africa. You were there, and I think the question that needs to be asked is, how is it going to become a turning point, especially for Palestine, that these boycott, divestment, and sanctions really hurts Israel? Because we're seeing right now the wars that they're having now, of course, and they've extended it to Lebanon, and who knows what might happen in the other parts of the region, that this could hurt them economically. Also, at the same time, you've got the BDS movement and this potential sanctions that could happen against them.
Thanks, Fahraaz. I'm not sure if you can hear me now.
No, we can. You're perfect. Thank you so much, Prof. Vally, for getting to a much better place where it's network.
Thanks. We have to realize that the first call to boycott apartheid South Africa was made as early as about 1959, and it only got traction decades later. And that was a result of the hard work of grassroots organizations. It's not that governments around the world and multilateral agencies decided one day that they will have sanctions against South Africa, sports bodies expelling South Africa. It was because of grassroots hard work. It does take time. And I think many people believe that this is the inflection point. Some call it the South African moment. And partly because Israel's crimes are so heinous and their depravity is so disturbing, and the Palestinian suffering so intolerable, and, multilateral organizations and the UN so paralyzed that people around the world are rising up in outrage, whether it's students in North America, workers refusing to offload Israeli goods and arms, cultural workers and sports people boycotting events, and many municipalities around the world declaring anti-apartheid free areas. The last time we witnessed such a galvanizing of solidarity was against apartheid South Africa. And many of us believe that that time has come again. There's a lot more we need to do. And of course, making Israel a pariah state is just one aspect of the struggle, not the only aspect. Resistance takes many forms. The South African legal team at the ICJ, by the way, international law is put on the dock. The victors of the Second World War used it. And in a sense, South Africa is speaking for the global South, pointing out the hypocrisy and the duplicity. I think I should stop there. Sorry.
All right. No, it's okay. Yeah, we just needed to stop you there, Professor Vally, because I need to get to, you mentioned international law. I wanted to get to Wesam. Wesam, every time Israel attacks any territory within Palestine, the question is, well, Israel has a right to defend itself. The sovereignty of Israel remains important, even if they are the actual aggressor. Now, it's a Western world perception of things, and you hear it within the media also, from the Western press. But why is it so difficult for the Western world to hand the same self-determination rule book for the people of Palestine?
Well, I think, as alluded to by Professor Vally, the international law itself is on the docks here. And the idea in theory that international law is supposed to be applied universally and that colonialism is a thing of the past, we see this this hypocrisy play out very much in very clear ways when it comes to Palestine. And I think it has a lot to do with the things that Muna alluded to earlier with regard to the broader interests at play. When you are talking about the development of international law that is very much led by these hegemonic powers, primarily in the West, and their economic, geopolitical interests that play a role in supporting Israel, also play a role in insulating it from accountability through these international mechanisms. But this is, the state of play in the system we live in, and we have to make use of these tools that are available to us to try to force the wheels of justice to turn within this broader system. These international mechanisms are not disconnected from the societies in which they operate. And I think we have to keep in mind that what we do in the international sphere with regard to the use of these international institutions also empowers the role of civil society on the ground to push for justice as well. And I take the view that we have to make use of these tools. We have to force the wheels of justice to turn. If they don't work in our favor, at the very least, we expose the problems therein and force change around it. And in the end, if they're not going to work for us, then we need to build new ones. But it is our responsibility to push these mechanisms to their limits and force them to work. And if they don't work for us, we need to find new systems. But this doesn't happen in a linear manner in isolation. It is very much connected to the movement on the ground and the broader need for a shift in political will. But that doesn't come, again, in the abstract. It has to come from the societies in which these institutions evolve from.
Shuruq, I want to come to you. As of July the 31st, and of course this is just statistics that I was able to get from Al Jazeera, more than 125 journalists, and mostly of them Palestinian, have been killed. It's a huge number, and sometimes I think everyone asks the question, has the world really understood the sheer number of this? Because they're not just journalists, they're also family members at the same time, killed for doing their job. And I know, as part of the Palestinian Journalist Syndicate, it's something that you just don't view as, investigating it. You view it from a more emotive perspective, because at the end of the day, they are your colleagues.
Yes, but for us in the Palestinian Journalist Syndicate, and even for me as a Palestinian journalist, this is targeting. It wasn't by any kind of mistake, because I've been a journalist since 30 years. I covered wars on Lebanon. I covered so many incidents, and I have so many personal stories about getting attacked, getting shot, getting arrested, getting humiliated, getting into my office, all sorts of attacks. And I tell you, every Palestinian journalist, or even a foreign journalist who worked in Palestine, they have personal stories of this. So let's start by saying that this has been a systematic attack. This is not new. It did not really start since October on us journalists. What happened is that it was more brutal. There's escalation, and our numbers say that since October 7th till now, we lost 165 of our colleagues. 21 of them are female journalists who lost their lives by the Israeli bombing, and so the others, with some of them, most of them, especially the female, with their children and family members. This is exactly 12% of the total number of journalists inside Gaza. This is a huge number. To make people understand this, in 2023 alone, the whole world, even what happened in Ukraine, we lost 26 journalists, sadly, of course. Imagine in only this year alone, in Gaza, we lost this huge number. We have hundreds who are injured. Some even lost their lives because they stayed bleeding for 7 or 8 hours, like our colleague Samer Abu Dakka from Al Jazeera. Like there's another 2 colleagues lately, the last 2 months, the same thing. There are some colleagues without their legs or their eyes. 88 media offices were totally bombed. One even from them is for Reuters and one for AFP. We have 124 journalists who were arrested since October. Most of them are West Bank, but we have more than 30 inside Gaza, and we have 2 of our colleagues still missing because Israel refuses to give any information for the Red Cross. Until now, the Red Cross, even though they have this international mandate, they did not even declare any statement. Their position was like any other international European or American position. I just want to tell you that even there are so many who maybe they are arrested, who lost their homes, who lost their offices, working without internet, without electricity, in real starvation in the north of Gaza. And we will know more and more stories as soon as this war ends. We're trying as much as we can to collect information. We ask for accountability. Everyone, every Israeli soldier, every Israeli settler, every Israeli politician took a decision to attack a journalist and forbid them from working and do their work really as international law say that they have to be protected, they have to be punished. Because they are doing this because first they don't want any narrative to go out, because it's a war on narrative according to Israel. And let me say more, it's even a war on based on lies. Because I follow the news and I followed it since the beginning, and I know what kind of narrative Israel was delivering to the world. All this war against civilized West, white Christian West against uncivilized Arabs or Muslims or Palestinians or colored. It was this kind of discourse actually. They don't want journalists to work. They are attacking us also in the West Bank, and we ask for accountability. And we think if they were punished, maybe we would have saved really lives of our colleagues.
Muna, the United States of America, I think when I listen to Joe Biden speak, he keeps on saying America is in a very healthy position. But when you listen to various citizens of the country, they tell a different story. They tell a story of why is it that as recent as a couple of weeks ago, the United States could give Israel 20 billion rand in terms of aid. Now, if America continues to support Israel, surely that narrative is going to change, isn't it? Do you hear it on the street? Do you feel it? And I'm not just asking from, the African Americans or the Arab Americans or the Hispanics or the Latinos. I'm talking about the Caucasian Americans who are actually tired of the fact that America is not in a healthy position. What is it in terms of the word on the street with regards to the American take on this continuous support for Israel?
Well, it's important to say that America is in a healthy position for only a select sum of the population. Most of the population here in the U.S. are actually struggling. The median income has actually decreased. People are living paycheck by paycheck. People are worried, healthcare is deteriorating now. You don't have comprehensive healthcare. Education has become, especially college education, has become the privilege of the upper middle class, not even middle class. And when they do get the college education, they come out with huge amounts of debts and student loans that takes them forever to actually pay back. And therefore, it takes them forever to actually start, building a life for themselves and so forth. And that's not even mentioning, like I said, that's not even mentioning the class issues and the race issues that has inflicted the U.S. for decades. Especially when it comes to Black Americans and Latino Americans and immigrants. You have a systematic structural policies that are meant to keep the poor and only enhance the rich's richness. So in that sense, no, the U.S. is not in a healthy place, but we have to also understand that the media plays a huge role in spreading the discourse of and legitimizing also the political discourse of the government. So, for example, prior to Biden's first speech and first debate, all the media outlets were in favor of Biden, saying that, right behind him, we need to defeat Trump. It wasn't until the Gaza situation became more intensified that the media all of a sudden, especially after the debate, all of a sudden switched its narrative and said, well, Biden has to step down. And they actually cited the fact that Biden did not do so well, that he looked kind of senile or whatever in the debate. But that's actually not the true reason. The true reason behind the institution calling or supporting the stepping down of Biden is because they know that if Biden maintained the Gaza issue would definitely ensure his loss in the next election. And the institution did not want that to happen. The same thing, for example, happens on the streets these days. Now we hear all the time that people are saying, well, Palestine is a global issue. Why is Palestine a global issue? The Gaza genocide raised eyebrows, so many eyebrows to the general public, because it was the first, like I said before, it was the first genocide that broadcasted live on TV, and people don't even have to dispute it. They see it, they witness it, and they hear every day that there's 20 billion here, 30 trillion there, in military and political aid. And this is American tax dollars. So the people are thinking, why is it that my American tax dollars are going to support genocide that I am actually watching live on TV, while I don't have adequate health care, I don't have access to equal education, I don't have, my civil rights are constantly being deteriorated. There's a crackdown on freedom of speech. So all of these things, and definitely a race issue with the police violence and brutality and mass incarcerations of African Americans and immigrants. These are all issues that plague the American society, and people are asking, why aren't you using these dollars to support us prior to supporting Israel? But again, like we mentioned before, it is because the United States cannot afford to lose its implementing hand or its base in the Middle East, because for Israel to lose. Let me rephrase that. In case of an Israeli loss, for example, in Gaza, that would have more implications on the United States than it does on Israel itself. And the reason why I say this is because Israel and American interests are intersected. They have intersected interests, but Israel has more to lose because the U.S. has more to lose because the U.S. will lose its ability to resolve on the international arena. It will expedite the way it's actually declining, and its hegemony being declining right now, especially given the rise of China right now, which is the most eminent danger for the United States. So it makes Israel more of a valuable asset to the United States, because it needs that oil control. If it controls that oil and gas, it also controls the extent to which China can actually develop, because it also relies on that. So Israel becomes more important. And that's why, regardless of the situation here in the United States, regardless of the inadequate services, social services, education, healthcare services, and so forth, it will always be the U.S. imperial colonial interest at the top.
I want to come to you, Wesam. December 29th, 2023, while, of course, many of the world is, celebrating Christmas or on the holidays, South Africa decides to take Israel to the International Court of Justice. No one ever dared taking Israel to such a high court in the land. Of course, the then International Relations Minister, Dr. Naledi Pandor, with a group of South African lawyers said, well, it's time to hold Israel accountable. How important was this case? It's still a case, but the fact that it was brought by South Africa and the fact that it's still there, talk to us about the importance of that, Wesam.
I mean, it was really a monumental shift in the discourse around the genocide, because it provided this legal clarification and triggered a mechanism in the international system that was not really one that I think many people were aware of. That this is one of the unique means through which Israel can be forced to answer. Because of the specifics of the Genocide Convention and the lack of reservations that Israel had, that opened the door for South Africa to be able to bring this case. But the most important dimension of it is the political will of South Africa to do so, because other states also could have done so. But having the ability to do so and actually doing it are two different things. And so when South Africa stepped up to the plate and brought the case, it, I think, shattered the illusion that Israel was above the law, at least from an institutional sense. And it forced Israel to come and answer. And the court issued provisional measures. The case itself continues to be heard. And unfortunately, the outcome of the case itself on the ground has been very minimal, because we have seen tens of thousands more dead since that case was brought. But in the eyes of the international community, and more importantly, I think, the people on the streets, the fact that this case is proceeding empowers them in their own push to hold Israel accountable in their respective spheres of influence, because you have this case proceeding within the International Court of Justice. And it is, again, one of those examples of forcing the wheels of justice to turn. They're not going to turn on their own, but it does give us some hope that these institutions can be reformed, can be challenged, can be used in the right way. But again, they don't operate in isolation, and there is broader interests at play that need to be taken into consideration, and a shift in the political will to enforce any decisions that come out of these international institutions.
Prof. Vally, I think you were glued to your television set when you heard these announcements being made. You, of course, like I think all of us, were watching the ICJ case on television or any other form of viewing it. The wheels are turning, as Wesam is saying. From a BDS perspective, do you feel it strengthens the case for these sanctions to be taken even further, given that Israel now is in a court, an international court, the highest court in the land, being asked to be held accountable for what they're doing right now in terms of the genocide in Gaza?
Yes, I mean, absolutely. I just want to support what Wesam has said. And it's just one tool that we can use. And we use the tools that are available to us. But I think it has to be emphasized that, apart from the excellent legal team, many of whom we know for decades, who've taken up issues on social justice in South Africa and quite often have been critical of the government, that the South African government was pushed by the solidarity movement, relentless hard work over the past 3 decades. So I think that is very important to remember. And we are now insisting, as you asked, on sanctions. Today, Israel and South Africa continues the trade. There have been a number of positive steps our government has taken, but there's a lot more they can do. For example, in Colombia, which supplied Israel with the coal they need, the biggest supplier of coal, have stopped coal exports to genocidal Israel. And we need to do the same because we supply Israel with, next to Russia, with the most amount of coal. There are many other areas that the solidarity movement in South Africa is working on. I think you need to understand, and this is what Muna talked about. I mean, the Palestine Feminist Collective talked about reproductive genocide. We've seen scholasticide, we've seen domicide, we've seen ecocide. And it's up to the people of the world. In South Africa, the BDS movement is made up of environmental groups, students and staff at universities. 8 of our universities, influenced by PUPI in Palestine, have called for an academic boycott. 8 of our universities, the senates, women's organizations have been galvanized, health workers groups because of the reproductive genocide. And the point is that Israel is a threat to the world. Palestinian bodies are in the front line. They basically test their weaponry on the bodies of men, women, and children in Palestine, but they export this elsewhere. Their software, their electronic surveillance, they give it to despots and dictators around the world to clamp down on democratic movements in their country. So the Palestinian struggle is, and this is the nature of Israel, as Muna said, it's like an aircraft carrier for empire in the Middle East, but it supported South American dictators, Central American military dictators. It supports authoritarian regimes around the world, as it supported apartheid South Africa. So we need to realize that the struggles around the world need to coalesce against this particular genocide and the sanctions issue, but together with the issue of seeing Zionism as racism, which much of the world have seen. There is the aspect of racism, which some of the panelists pointed out, which needs, it has resonance with us. When Mandela or Archbishop Tutu linked our struggle to the Palestinian struggle, partly for that reason, the famous line of Mandela, South Africans won't be free unless the Palestinians are free. Archbishop Desmond Tutu said it's worse than apartheid, and it certainly is. So I think that this issue is an international issue, that Palestinians are suffering, and Lebanese and Yemenis. And of course, what they're starting to do in the West Bank is what they've done in Gaza and what they want to do in Lebanon. And this will continue. Zionism
Prof. Vally, sorry, I have to stop you there. Muna, I want you to comment on this. Muna, I was supposed to go to Shuruq. I'm just going to give you 1 minute to comment on this, Muna.
Yes, thank you so much for allowing me this opportunity.
No problem.
I just say I have the utmost admiration for the South African initiative at the Criminal Court of Justice. However, I really want to try to warn against depending on international law as a way to resolve the Palestinian question. We have to also remember that the United Nations itself is responsible for creating the question of Palestine when it unrightfully divided a land it had no right to divide without the consultation of the Palestinians, divide it between the majority of Arab Muslim Palestinians and the very minority of the Jewish population, giving the most land to actually the very minority. So in that sense, we have to remember that the UN itself is implicated. You can't rely on a system that actually generated a problem to actually resolve the problem for you. So in that sense, this explains why historically the United Nations have always failed Palestinians. So on what basis do we have to actually rely or keep pushing that discourse as if the more we push it, we should expect different results? We're not going to have different results. Different results will only happen when things on the ground changes, and things on the ground change only by the direct challenge of U.S. imperialism in the Middle East and the settler colonial establishment as its arm in the Middle East. So in that sense, I want to refer to one of my favorite scholars, Frantz Fanon. He actually says, to the extent that violence can only be eradicated by greater violence. However, there's a difference between those two violence. One is a colonial violence that seeks to subordinate. The other is a violence that seeks to liberate. So, in that sense, we can understand why, for example, Nelson Mandela has been on the American terrorist list till 2006. So, but these definitions of terrorism and so forth, and condemning the acts of resistance, are issued actually by international law. Why should I depend on international law that actually works against me all the time?
Muna, sorry, I have to stop you there because I have to get Shuruq into the Shuruq. When South Africa were presenting its case at the ICJ, a number of the argument points was the killing of journalists. Someone that, of course, you would have known quite well, Shireen Abu Akleh, was brought into it. Shireen Abu Akleh has an annual lecture that happens at the very same university Professor Vally lectures in, and that's University of Johannesburg. When they were bringing up these arguments, it was the same, week where while Al-Dahdu lost so many of his family members, I think he had lost his son at that week. It really is a compelling argument, even though it's an argument that speaks of the lives of journalists just doing their job. But that in itself really brought a strengthening to the case to South Africa, didn't it? The fact that media professionals are being targeted just by doing their job.
Yes, we always, when we mention Shireen was my classmate since we were kids, and then we continued on in journalism, and I know that her case is not really opened even, not just anybody answered, it's not even opened in the court, though everything is clear. I have to say that I agree with all that was said with my colleagues in the concept that there's a big appreciation for what South Africa did. When I was listening to the lawyers giving the testimonies about the children, about the killing, about the genocide, I really wanted to hear this as a Palestinian, though it wasn't really broadcast in so many places, most of the places in Europe and America. And in the other hand, I understand what Muna is saying. How can we really work things out with this international law that never gave us justice, and Mona explained all its complications. What I just want to say, I don't want to say many long words, because I think everybody knows what's going on, but what I want to say is that, yes, I want to see Israel punished. Who are killed in my society are children, our academics, our teachers, our students, our journalists, our doctors. And it's not like Amanpour said, the CNN journalist, which really made me mad when she said, and this applies, of course, to everything else, since unless there are no foreign journalists inside Gaza, then there are no journalists. And this applies to doctors maybe and to teachers and so on. What I can say is that it's very important to what South Africa did and all the international community, the ones who are standing with us. The ones who are not standing against this genocide, they are partners in this. I have a right to resist as a Palestinian, to resist this occupation, this colonialism, this apartheid, this racism, all the vocabulary, and I have the right to exist. And I don't think we are going to a good place from where we are now, and looking on how the international community is dealing. But I really have faith in all the voices that stood with us and who stand usually with all the human rights issues, like Africa, like all the students in the universities, like all the people who went in the streets, like all the journalists who really fought to write an article. And I have a faith that things will change. Maybe it will take time, but this is my right to exist. Anybody who stood silent is with the partner in this. And even if the international law was also partner in my genocide, at least I was really happy to hear the testimonies, to hear my voice in front of the world. Somebody is really saying that this has to stop and there should be accountability.
Ladies and gentlemen, unfortunately, we just have, I'm going to ask my director just to give each one of you 2 minutes just for your closing remarks. I'm going to start with, here at home, with Professor Vally. Prof, the boycotts, for it to be successful, the West would need to play their part. Are we living in a fantasy land thinking it's going to happen, that the West is going to play its part to hold Israel accountable? Do you see that happening? Your 2 minutes starts now.
Well, we have to make a distinction between the government and the people. I mean, the governments of Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher supported apartheid South Africa, but it was people on the ground through grassroots organizations who put pressure on their governments. But, you know, sanctions is one issue. It's also the right to resist occupation, which is codified in international law as well. And I just want to end by saying that, you know, the night is darkest just before dawn, and many of us fighting against apartheid in the liberation movements thought we would never see the end of apartheid. But because of international solidarity and internal resistance, as well as sanctions, all of this plays a role, and they're all facets of the struggle. Thanks.
Muna, I want to come to you. In just over a few weeks' time, the US is going to have its elections. I know you're in Michigan, where there is a massive Arab American population, and obviously it's going to be one of those swing states that's going to determine potentially how this election goes. From the word on the street, anyone, and I'm just talking, you know, Arab Americans, I'm talking about each and every American convinced that either Trump or Harris, whoever comes into power, is really going to push for the ceasefire and ultimately allow for the Palestinians to have their right of self-determination?
Only the naive, I would say. Absolutely not. As a matter of fact, it's also important here to note that a very main reason why Biden was actually pushed to step down and have Kamala Harris take over is precisely to divide the Arab American vote, because they knew that Arab Americans were eminent for not voting for Biden. So a way for them to try to break that and try to cultivate a little bit more support of the Arab American voters, what they did is they pushed further for Biden to step down. That's why I say and I insist that the reason why Biden stepped down, not like what the American media here is saying, because his age and his cognitive skills, it is Gaza that brought him down, and the hope was that Kamala would be able to restore some of those votes, in the sense that people feel like as a vice president she didn't really have a say in the Biden's administration's and Biden's policies towards Israel and the support of genocide. But as we all know, and as we see every single day by Kamala Harris even doubling down on Israel's support, they are two coins for the same system. And likewise is the Trump. So the Arab American community is actually faced with three choices: Trump, Kamala, and a third-party candidate. Now there's a movement. We both know that both the Republicans and Democrats are two faces for the same coin. They will never change their policy, their foreign policy in terms of Palestine, because this is actually entrenched in history. It's always going to be pro-Israel, and we highlighted the reasons why. So now the Arab American community is trying to unify their votes around a third-party candidate, so they can actually push the envelope a little bit to say to the American elected official, this two-party system is not democratic. This two-party system does not represent us. We demand a better system. We demand representatives that project our values and our views. But having said that, I do want to take one more minute to say final remarks. In the final thing, I want to say, I want to talk about the implications of the Gaza genocide. There are few regional wars in the history of conflicts that had global implications, with the exception of Gaza. Gaza is a regional war with the implications that only can happen in a larger international war. And the reason why I say that for three reasons. First of all, it is global in the sense that the question of Palestine recentered the moral issues and civil rights and all of that to the forefront globally. So these are issues that are being constantly debated at this point. It put the international law under the scrutiny of the people. To what effect, to what use is the institution beneficial? And it is the only foreign issue that had a direct implication on the United States election. The loss of the Democratic Party will be due to the Gaza question. One more.
No problem.
Gaza, also the Gaza one had a huge economic global implication. And this you never see in any regional war, in the sense that when Yemen entered the axis of resistance, and it's cut for the shipment, it had actually global economic ramifications. This is absolutely incredible. Okay. So it's in this sense, Gaza speaks and Palestine speaks to the whole world.
I have
on behalf of all the marginalized.
No, for sure. No, thank you so much for that, Muna. I have to get in Shuruq. As we speak now, there are still journalists operating in the occupied West Bank. There's still journalists in Gaza. They're doing their jobs. As a fellow journalist that has been doing this for over 3 decades, there must be a sense of, even though there's fear, even though there's a sense of concern, there's still a sense of pride, isn't there, that these journalists will do what they do in order to make sure that the world gets the truth about what's happening on the ground in Gaza.
Yes, sure. This is why they continue working. And I don't think there's any journalist in the whole world really function and go on working in the same circumstances that my colleagues are working. They were for the past year. They were our eyes, our senses. Those local journalists were really very brave, and they really wanted everybody to see what's going on. They were like giving testimonies. They are witnesses on the genocide and massacre inside Gaza, while Israel tried to make sure that nobody would see anything. So I think they are going on. I know they are traumatized. They are full of loss, but they are functioning. They are working. They believe in what they do. And this is one of our tools, actually, to deliver to the world what's going on. We don't really count on the US government or any other governments in Europe, but we really count on 3 people who believe in human rights, who stood up and said loudly and on our right to resist and live free.
Wesam, I'm going to come to you to just close this off. Israel has been condemned in 545 resolutions. They still don't comply with it. But we saw earlier on this year when ICC prosecutor Karim Khan obviously saying that there's a potential of these warrants of arrest for Netanyahu and UF Gallant. Is this going to be a game changer? Should this go ahead? I know the rest of the panelists have been saying let's not rely on international law. But what if there's the slight 1% that this does go through? Does this change a lot in terms of international law? Unfortunately, I'm going to just have to give you 1 minute to answer this, Wesam.
Thank you. Well, I mean, it could be a game changer if the warrants are issued and there is enforcement of these arrest warrants. But again, the system is being tested, and even if the warrants are issued, the work doesn't stop there. These are 2 individuals within a system of impunity that has continued to operate. And the work is going to continue regardless on all fronts, regardless of what happens at the ICC. It is just one tool that we need to push and move it forward, but other areas need to continue to be operated.
Unfortunately, time has definitely come to an end. Professor Salim, Wesam, Shuruq, Munna, thank you guys so much for joining us here on the special edition of Prize for Freedom. We really do appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you for having us.
No, it's an absolute pleasure. That's Professor Salim Vally, South African BDS member, Wesam Ahmad, the head of the Center for Applied International Law at the Al-Haq Center in Ramallah, and Shuruq Asad, who's also from Ramallah, but she is a member of the General Secretariat of Palestinian Journalists Syndicate, and Munna Tareh, a Middle Eastern political analyst and a Palestinian American residing in Detroit, Michigan. Well, that's all we've come to you on the special edition here on marking the first year of the start of the genocide in Gaza. From myself, Fahraaz Patel, and the rest of the team here in Johannesburg that have put a really great effort in making this production happen. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Children of Gaza, Allah's plan will come true. This promise is for you. With patience you'll get through. From the evil to the hate to the lies they create, Palestine will be free. Palestine will be free. From the evil to the hate to the lies they create.